Chicago was drowning in lights outside, but the apartment on the 14th floor was in darkness. Oliver was clutching a cheap yellow lighter in his hand. Alien, alien, as if from another world. None of them smoked. This little object was more than a clue. He was a crack that threatened to tear his life apart.
In the heart of Chicago, amidst towering buildings and perpetual hustle, there was a cozy apartment on the 14th floor of one of the modern residential complexes. Large windows with panoramic views opened up to the city skyline, shimmering with the lights of advertising signs and passing cars. It was here, in a house with designer renovations and stylish furniture, that the Norton family lived. Oliver, Amanda, and their 6-year-old daughter, Emily. Oliver Norton, 36 years old, was a man whose life outwardly seemed like a dream come true. Tall and fit, with a touch of gray at his temples and the confident gaze of brown eyes, he exuded charisma and calmness that attracted people. A documentary photographer, he made a name for himself through projects dedicated to social issues such as climate change, indigenous rights, and humanitarian crises. His works were exhibited in galleries in New York and London, and in 2020, one of his photographs became the cover of National Geographic. Born in the quiet suburb of Milwaukee, Oliver had been drawn to art since childhood. His father, an engineer, instilled in him a love for precision, while his mother, a teacher, gave him the ability to see beauty in details. He received his first camera as a gift on his 16th birthday, and from then on, his destiny was sealed. After college, he took a job as a photojournalist for a small newspaper but quickly realized that local news was too limiting for him. He began searching for global stories that could change the world, and this drive took him to the most remote corners of the planet. Oliver's professional life was rich and exciting, but behind it all was a person who deeply valued stability and family comfort. Despite his frequent trips, he always tried to be home for at least a few consecutive weeks to spend time with his wife Amanda and daughter Emily. Family was not just a quiet harbor for him, it was the meaning of his existence. Every time he set off on another business trip, he mentally promised himself to return with new stories and gifts for his daughter, who eagerly examined the exotic trinkets he brought back from distant countries. Amanda Norton, 34 years old, was a woman with an open heart and infectious laughter. Her blonde hair fell in gentle waves over her shoulders, and her blue eyes seemed to reflect the entire world that she diligently painted. Amanda worked as a children's book illustrator, and her creations were a source of inspiration for thousands of children. She had the ability to turn simple stories into magic, and her characters, cute animals, fantastic creatures, and lively landscapes, came to life on the pages of her books. Amanda grew up in Portland in a family of musicians. Her childhood was spent among albums with sheet music, pencils, and paints, which fostered her love for art. After college, she moved to Chicago, where she began her career as a designer at an advertising firm, but soon realized that she wanted to work for children. It was there that she met Oliver at a photography exhibition, where she was captivated by his sincerity and passion for his work. Their romance was swift, filled with trips, creative evenings, and dreams of the future. A year later, they got married, and soon they had a daughter, Emily, who became the center of their universe. However, over the years, Amanda's creative career gained momentum, and she devoted more and more time to her work. In recent months, her schedule had become especially hectic due to a new project with a renowned gallerist, about which she spoke with both excitement and reservation. Emily, a 6-year-old girl with a mischievous smile and dimples on her cheeks, was a blend of her parents' best traits. She had inherited her artistic talent from her mother and her father's keen perspective on the world. Her rooms were cluttered with drawing albums and nature photographs, which she loved to admire alongside Oliver. Emily dreamed of becoming an artist or a photographer, but what she enjoyed most was when the whole family gathered together for dinner or played board games. Their apartment was a reflection of their lives. The walls were adorned with Oliver's travel photographs, and Amanda's illustrations. The spacious living room, with its huge sofa and fireplace, served as the place where the family spent their rare evenings together. Here they watched movies, read books, or simply talked. But lately, these moments had become increasingly rare. The kitchen always smelled of coffee, which Oliver brewed every morning when he was home. Nearby stood the table where Amanda loved to work, surrounded by cups of pencils and watercolor paints. Her creative chaos was a part of their home, but now it began to seem distant to Oliver, just like she herself. Their marriage had not always been like this. Once they shared everything, joy, fears, dreams. But Oliver's frequent trips and Amanda's growing busyness gradually created a gulf between them. He noticed how she had started spending more time in her studio, responding less and less to his attempts to talk. She often excused herself with work, citing deadlines and client meetings, but Oliver felt there was something more behind it. When he went on business trips, he felt like he was losing control over his life. He missed the times when Amanda would call him every night, and their conversations filled his heart with warmth. Now her messages were short and curt, as if she wrote them out of obligation. One day, returning home earlier than expected, he found her phone face down, a small detail, but it left an unpleasant feeling in him. The past few months had been especially difficult. Oliver noticed that Amanda was coming home late, sometimes even avoiding communication. One day, she explained it as meetings with a new client, whom she described as promising and inspiring, but she did not mention his name. Her enthusiasm irritated Oliver, though he couldn't explain why. A coldness had arisen in their relationship that he didn't know how to overcome. Oliver tried to reconnect. He suggested joint trips, parties, or at least family dinners. Amanda agreed, but her thoughts always seemed to be somewhere far away. Even Emily began to ask questions. Why does Mom work so much? These words made Oliver ponder whether they were losing something important. The Norton family stood on the brink of change, though none of them realized it yet. Oliver hoped he could regain their former closeness. Amanda struggled with internal conflicts, and Emily simply wanted her parents to laugh together again. All of this was the beginning of a story that was to turn their lives upside down. Returning from a business trip had always brought Oliver special joy. He looked forward to this trip home as an opportunity to once again feel the coziness of their apartment, enjoy his daughter's embrace, and spend a quiet evening with Amanda. However, this time, standing in the hallway of their apartment with a suitcase in one hand and a backpack in the other, he felt not the usual warmth, but a strange tension. Amanda, hearing the sound of his keys in the lock, came out into the hallway. She was wearing a stylish black dress that accentuated her slender figure and bright red lipstick. Her hair was neatly arranged, and her light makeup emphasized her facial features. Oliver felt puzzled. There was something unusual about her appearance. "You look like you're on a magazine cover today," he remarked, trying to hide a hint of jealousy with a joke. "Are we having an evening reception, or did I miss something?" Amanda smiled, but her smile seemed a bit forced. "Oh, it's just a meeting with a client," she replied, looking away. "We were discussing a project for a new book series. You know how important first impressions are." Oliver nodded, although inside he felt a surge of distrust. Usually, Amanda wore comfortable clothes to her meetings, but today she was dressed in almost evening elegance. Moreover, her explanation seemed jumbled, as if she had prepared this phrase in advance. "How's Emily? Is she already asleep?" Oliver decided to change the subject. "Yes, she was tired after her drawing lessons," Amanda replied, hurriedly hiding her phone in her dress pocket. "I was trying to get her to bed earlier." The evening passed in a strange silence. Amanda spent most of her time in her studio, closing the door, and Oliver, despite being tired from the flight, couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned in bed, replaying the minute details in his mind: her outfit, her tension, her evasive answers. Something was wrong. The next morning, when Amanda left for another meeting, Oliver decided to drive Emily to school. Getting into the car, he noticed a small object lying on the floor in front of the passenger seat. It was a cheap lighter, plastic, bright yellow, with scratches on the casing. He picked it up, holding it in his hands as if it were evidence. Neither of them smoked, and among their friends, as far as he knew, there were no smokers. The lighter seemed completely out of place in their car. "Dad, what are you doing?" Emily asked from the back seat, noticing her father's thoughtful look. "Nothing, sweetie, just some trash," he replied, putting the find in his pocket. But it was far from nothing. The lighter seemed to bring to life all those little things he had been trying not to notice. Her frequent delays, her constant phone usage, the strange scent on her clothes. It all formed a mosaic where only a few pieces were missing to see the full picture. Over the next few days, Oliver began to observe Amanda more closely. He didn't want to cause scenes or make accusations without evidence, but his sense of unease was growing. He was especially suspicious of the calls Amanda took in his presence. Every time the JM name appeared on her phone screen, she quickly answered with a short phrase, "I'm busy right now. I'll call you back." She always said this calmly, but Oliver noticed how her fingers tightened slightly around the phone, and her voice became steady, almost emotionless. "Who is that?" he asked one day, trying to sound as casual as possible. "It's a client," she responded without hesitation. "We're discussing the schedule for the book." Oliver nodded, but her answer didn't seem convincing to him. Usually she talked about clients with enthusiasm, described project details, and discussed them together with him. But JM was as if erased from her world, a person she only mentioned out of extreme necessity. Later, Oliver began to notice another oddity. Amanda sometimes had a faint scent of men's cologne on her clothes. It was a subtle, expensive fragrance, but it definitely wasn't his. One day, he smelled it when he hugged her after coming home from work. Amanda quickly pulled away, as if she didn't want him to notice. "New scent?" he asked with a smile, though inside he felt chilled. "Oh, probably a colleague," she replied, trying to change the subject. At meetings, scents often mix. Her explanation was plausible, but only at first glance. Oliver knew perfectly well that Amanda always preferred to work alone, in her studio or on her laptop at home. Who could have left that scent on her clothes? Over time, Oliver began to notice how Amanda was distancing herself more and more. She left for meetings, sometimes not even explaining where she was going. Her excuses became vaguer, and her attention to him and Emily became less noticeable. One evening, when Emily had fallen asleep, Oliver decided to try to talk openly with Amanda. They sat on the couch, and he quietly asked, "Amanda, is everything all right between us?" She looked at him with surprise, as if he had asked something ridiculous. "Of course," she replied, shrugging her shoulders. "Why are you asking? You seem different. All this time, these meetings, your work. I just want to make sure everything is okay between us." She laughed, but there was no lightness in her laugh. "Oliver, you're overthinking things. Everything is fine. It's just stress." But he knew it wasn't. Amanda avoided his gaze. Her hands trembled when she brought the cup to her lips. Something was clearly wrong, and Oliver felt that the truth would soon begin to surface. At night, while Amanda was asleep, Oliver sat in his workshop, rifling through a box of tools. Among everything else, he found a small box containing a brand new GPS tracker he had bought a few days earlier. This device was the result of his long deliberations. He felt he couldn't handle his suspicions without solid evidence. Too many small details seemed wrong but were too vague to turn into direct accusations. The next morning, as Amanda was getting ready for another meeting, Oliver carefully installed the tracker under the rear bumper of her car. The device was small, waterproof, and practically invisible. His hands trembled slightly with tension, but he made sure everything was done correctly. Oliver didn't immediately start checking the tracker. He had promised himself not to turn his life into constant surveillance, but after a few days, he couldn't hold back. Opening the app on his phone, he saw her travel routes. Most often, Amanda headed to their usual places, the bookstore, the studio, or a cafe. But one location repeated with alarming regularity: a hotel in the city center. Why a hotel? He thought. Could she be meeting clients there? Considering that Amanda always preferred working from home or her studio, it seemed odd. Oliver decided not to take any action for now, but the thought that he needed to find out what was happening there firmly took root in his mind. One night, when Amanda had fallen asleep, Oliver approached her laptop, which stood on the living room table. He hesitated for a long time, but eventually opened it. The password was simple: Emily's birthday. His heart pounded like a drum as he browsed through work folders and the email client. Nothing unusual. But then he found a folder with encrypted emails. It was protected by a separate password, but Oliver wasn't going to give up. After several failed attempts, he remembered that Amanda often used titles of her favorite books as passwords. Trying a combination related to The Little Prince, he gained access. What he saw shocked him. In the correspondence with someone signed as Jack Morgan, there were candid discussions. They talked about the time and place of meetings, ways to hide their connection, even how Amanda was making excuses to her husband. Several emails were so intimate that Oliver felt emptied out. His hands trembled as he took screenshots and saved the emails to a flash drive. He could no longer ignore the truth. Amanda had betrayed him. A week had passed since Oliver installed the GPS tracker on Amanda's car. During all this time, he tried to stay calm, ignore the growing anxiety, and hope his suspicions were unfounded. However, that evening, the tracker's data clearly showed that Amanda was heading to the hotel again. It was her fourth visit in the past 10 days, and Oliver's patience had run out. Sitting in his car not far from home, he watched the dot on his phone's screen slowly move through the city streets. Oliver felt his breathing quicken. He didn't want to believe his wife was capable of such a thing, but everything pointed to that. If I don't do this now, I'll never know the truth, he whispered to himself. Taking the camera from the passenger seat, he started the car and cautiously followed Amanda. Traffic slowed his progress, and every second he feared losing sight of her. When the GPS showed her car parked at the Glenview Luxury Hotel, he stopped around the corner and got out of the car. Hiding behind parked cars, Oliver watched the hotel entrance. A few minutes later, he saw Amanda. She got out of her car, holding a small purse. She was wearing an elegant black dress, he remembered. She had bought it last summer for an official event. Today, the dress looked especially provocative. Her face was radiant, as if she were heading to a celebration, not a business meeting. Each step she took up the entrance stairs felt like a knife to his heart. Oliver took out his camera and snapped a few shots, trying to keep her in the center of the frame. He felt someone might notice his actions, but the fear of missing the moment was stronger. When Amanda disappeared behind the revolving door, he froze for a moment. His mind was torn: burst in there right now and demand explanations, or stay calm and find out everything. He took a deep breath. No more impulsive decisions. I need more evidence, he decided. Approaching the entrance, he felt awkward. On one hand, he was determined, but on the other, he realized how abnormal his behavior was. Nevertheless, love and anger pushed him forward. Oliver walked inside. The hotel lobby was spacious, with marble floors and golden chandeliers. At the reception desk stood a woman in a strict uniform who greeted each visitor with a smile. Oliver approached her, trying to appear confident, though inside he was boiling. "How can I help you?" she asked politely, looking over her glasses. "I'm looking for my wife," he began, trying to keep his voice calm and friendly. "She was supposed to book a room. Amanda Norton." The woman frowned, scanning the list on the screen. "Sorry, But that information is confidential, she replied apologetically. This didn't stop Oliver. He thanked her and moved toward the elevators. On the way, he noticed a sign, second floor, VIP area. Something told him Amanda was right there. The elevator took him to the second floor. The corridor was quiet and empty, with only the muted light of the chandeliers reflecting off walls with golden patterns. Oliver walked, trying not to make any noise, his heart pounding like crazy. And then he saw her. Amanda stood by the door of one of the rooms next to a man. Even from behind, he recognized her. The same graceful movements, the same favorite scent, which now he associated with betrayal. She hugged the man, and that was too much. Oliver pressed himself against the wall, trying to remain unnoticed, and just in case, turned on the camera. He took a few photos, then switched to video. The man turned to face Oliver, and he immediately recognized him. It was Jack Morgan, the gallerist Amanda had worked with a few years ago. They were laughing and talking quietly about something. At one point, Jack ran his hand along her cheek, and she smiled. Oliver felt his heart tighten with pain. He wanted to burst in, scream, demand explanations, but he knew it wouldn't change anything. His weapon was the evidence, and he was already gathering it. When Amanda and Jack entered the room, Oliver descended the stairs. His hands were trembling, and his mind was clouded. He left the hotel without looking back and got into his car. For a few minutes, he just sat there, staring at a single point. "This is it," he whispered, realizing that there was no turning back now. He looked at the camera screen. The photos and videos were clear. Now he had evidence. But along with that came the realization that his life would never be the same again. After a night spent in the agony of doubt and betrayal, Oliver decided that he couldn't act impulsively. The emotions boiling inside demanded immediate confrontation, but he knew he needed to prepare, gather evidence, and understand the full depth of the situation. His family, and especially the future of his daughter Emily, were too important to let resentment take over. In the morning, Oliver called his old acquaintance Randy, who worked at a law firm. They rarely communicated, but Randy had once helped him with contracts for photo licensing. Oliver decided that this time he would need a different kind of help. "Randy, I have a personal request for you," he began after a brief exchange of pleasantries. "Of course, what's wrong?" The friend's voice carried a note of worry. Oliver explained the situation, trying not to delve into the details. He only needed the name of a reliable private detective, someone who could dig deeper than he could himself. "Try contacting Frank Dillard. He works without asking too many questions, but his results are always accurate. I'll give you his contact information," Randy replied. That same day, a few hours later, Oliver was sitting in a small office on the outskirts of the city. Frank Dillard's office resembled scenes from a classic detective story. An old-fashioned writing desk with a lamp, stacks of folders, and faded photographs on the walls. Frank, a man in his 50s with a serious look and thinning hair, did not give the impression of someone prone to sentimentality. He listened attentively to Oliver's story, asking probing questions. "How long has this been going on, in your estimation?" Frank asked, leaning his elbows on the desk. "I'm not sure exactly. I started suspecting something a few months ago, but the evidence only appeared recently," Oliver replied. "Do you already have materials?" Oliver handed the detective a flash drive with screenshots of correspondence, photos, and videos taken at the hotel. "This is a useful start," Frank nodded, studying the files. "Do you want to know everything?" Oliver held his breath for a moment. The answer seemed obvious, but the fear of hearing the truth prevented him from speaking. Finally, he managed to say, "Yes, everything that will help me understand what's happening and protect myself." Frank nodded, his voice calm, even reassuring. "All right, I'll start with Jack Morgan. If he left any traces, I'll find them." The next few days passed agonizingly for Oliver. He didn't want to show Amanda that he suspected something, and tried to behave as usual. However, it became increasingly difficult. Every one of her trips, every phone call made him wonder if new chapters were being added to this story of betrayal. Frank turned out to be a man of action. By the second day, he informed Oliver that he had started checking Jack's gallery's financial documents. His connections with banks and access to public databases allowed him to quickly discover that the gallery was on the verge of bankruptcy. Moreover, several collectors who had previously worked with Jack refused to continue due to his reputation. Frank also hired observers to monitor Jack's movements. One day he called Oliver with an update. "Your hero visited a jewelry store yesterday. He bought something small, expensive, possibly a ring." "A ring? Is he planning to propose?" Oliver blurted out, his voice tinged with a mixture of pain and anger. "Possibly. Or it could just be another step to keep your wife in his orbit," Frank replied calmly. A week later, Frank returned with a full report. He invited Oliver to his office and spread a stack of documents before him. "Jack Morgan," he began, pointing to photographs showing Jack in various locations, at the hotel, at the jewelry store, in the cafe where he often met with Amanda. "Not only your wife's lover, but also a person with serious financial problems. His gallery is in debt. He owes suppliers and even his own staff." Oliver silently looked at the pictures, feeling his anger shift to cold calculation. "And that's not all," Frank continued. "Morgan is actively using Amanda as a financial source. Her accounts show transfers of large sums to his business accounts. He has clearly convinced her that without her help, the gallery will close, but the worst was yet to come. I also discovered that Morgan threatened to expose their relationship to her. He manipulates her, making her feel obligated to him. There's correspondence where he directly says, 'If you stop supporting me, I'll tell your husband everything.'" These words echoed in Oliver's head. His world had completely shattered. It was not just betrayal, it was a chain of manipulations that turned their family into a tool for someone else's purposes. "Thank you, Frank. This is very valuable," Oliver said, barely containing his emotions. "What are you going to do next?" the detective asked. Oliver took a deep breath. "I don't know yet, but now I have everything I need to make the right choice." Oliver now knew more than he would have wished. Every time he saw Amanda, he felt his heart tighten with resentment and rage. He wanted to ask her, demand explanations, but understood that the time had not yet come. He had evidence, but he wanted to know how far this story had gone. He continued to monitor her movements, noticing how often her trips ended at the hotel. Each time he convinced himself that he had to remain cold-blooded. This wasn't just cheating, it was a story of manipulation, lies, and betrayal. Having gathered all the evidence, Oliver decided it was time to act. He began planning his next step to not only confront Amanda, but also protect his daughter from the consequences of her actions. He felt that his life was about to change forever and prepared to meet these changes with dignity. After weeks of doubt, Oliver felt his world was on the brink of collapse. The surveillance he had been conducting, along with the materials provided by Detective Frank Dillard, were painting a terrifying picture. But the most shocking part of the story emerged by accident, on the computer screen Amanda had left on in their shared living room. It was a rainy evening. Amanda had gone to the studio, promising to return late. Oliver sat in the living room, trying to distract himself from his thoughts by watching television. His attention was drawn to his wife's laptop, whose screen suddenly lit up. She had forgotten to close her email. Curiosity got the better of him, and he leaned closer. The screen displayed an email with the subject, "Meeting confirmation with buyer." The content of the email knocked him off his feet. "Amanda, as we discussed, I am ready to meet tomorrow at 2 p.m. to discuss the purchase of your share in the house. If your husband is against it, we will have to find a workaround." Oliver felt like his heart had stopped. Amanda was planning to sell her share of their joint house, the house they had built together, where their daughter had grown up, and all of this was to save Jack Morgan's gallery. He slowly sank into a chair, rereading the email. His pain turned to rage. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was an attack on their shared future, their home. The next morning, Oliver watched as Amanda prepared for her latest meeting. She carefully selected her outfit, a sharp suit perfect for business negotiations. Her movements seemed a bit nervous. Her fingers lingered longer than usual on the zipper of her handbag, and her gaze avoided his. Oliver remained silent, observing her with a stone-faced expression. He didn't want to reveal his determination. All he needed to do was wait until she left. When the door closed behind Amanda, Oliver immediately opened the saved email on her laptop. He had already memorized the meeting address, the realtor's office downtown. Entering the address into his GPS, he gathered himself and left the house. Ahead awaited a confrontation that was meant to put an end to their relationship. The realtor's office was located on one of the city's prestigious streets. Tall glass windows let in plenty of light, and inside reigned a sterile elegance. White walls, light wooden furniture, and abstract landscape paintings created an atmosphere of success and professionalism. When Oliver entered, his gaze immediately fell on Amanda. She was sitting at a round table opposite a man in a strict dark suit. Papers and pens lay before them, ready for signing. At that moment, Amanda was laughing, not loudly, but with a lightness he hadn't seen in her behavior at home for a long time. However, as soon as she noticed Oliver, her smile vanished. Her face paled, as if her blood had instantly drained. Her eyes widened in fear. The man, evidently noticing her change, turned his head and looked at Oliver as well. He was presentable, with a confident posture and the cold gaze of a professional who saw the situation merely as a deal. Oliver slowly approached the table, trying to maintain his composure. His heart was pounding wildly, but outwardly he looked calm. "Oliver, what are you doing here?" Amanda finally spoke. Her voice trembled, but she tried to sound firm. He ignored her question. His attention was focused on the man. "Excuse me," he addressed the realtor, "but this house belongs to both of us. No sale can take place without my consent." The man seemed slightly flustered. He raised his eyebrows, looking first at Amanda, then at Oliver. "If that's the case," he began, hastily gathering his papers, "I can't proceed. Amanda, you need to sort this out." His voice was dry and businesslike, like someone who had dealt with similar issues numerous times. He stood up from the table, casting Amanda a brief glance that showed a hint of irritation. "If the situation changes, contact me." With those words, he quickly left the office, leaving them alone. When the door behind the realtor closed, a tense silence settled in the room. Amanda slowly turned to Oliver, her hands shaking. "You can't just interfere like that," she said through gritted teeth, trying to give her voice the confidence she didn't have. Oliver looked at her with cold determination. He didn't shout, didn't throw accusations. His words were short, but they carried steel firmness. "We will talk at home." Amanda wanted to say something, but met his gaze and fell silent. In her eyes were fear and the understanding that excuses would no longer help. The evening was quiet, almost deceptively calm. Emily had long been asleep in her room, wrapped in her favorite animal print blanket. The house was silent, broken only by the hum of the heating. But in the living room, it was different. The tension was building, felt in every detail, in the barely audible ticking of the wall clock, in the dim lamplight, in the heavy glances. Amanda sat on the couch, trying to appear calm, but her posture betrayed internal fear. Her hands were slightly trembling, her fingers nervously fiddling with the hem of her sweater. She didn't look at Oliver. His gaze was too heavy, too direct. He stood opposite, leaning his arms on the back of the chair, as if trying to hold himself from shouting. His face was cold, devoid of his usual warmth, and his voice was low and threatening. "Did you intend to sell the house?" he asked. These words, spoken almost in a whisper, were like a clap of thunder. Amanda flinched, but didn't respond immediately. She tried to gather courage to justify herself, but her throat was dry. It's not what it seems," she finally said, still avoiding his gaze. Oliver, as if expecting this answer, straightened up sharply and threw a flash drive onto the table. The metallic sound of the impact echoed through the room, making Amanda flinch. "Not what it seems?" His voice became cold, like an icy wind. "Were you going to sell our family for him?" Amanda looked into his eyes for the first time. They were full of anger, disappointment, pain. This was not the Oliver she knew. She opened her mouth to say something, but couldn't find the words. "I know everything, Amanda, everything," he continued, leaning closer to her. "I have letters, recordings, photographs, even transfers to his accounts. Do you think I'm so stupid I wouldn't notice?" Her face turned deathly pale. She covered her mouth with her palm, as if trying to suppress the rising tears. "Why?" His voice became quieter, but only more terrifying. Amanda covered her face with her hands. Her shoulders shook. It seemed she was about to break down, but she stayed silent for a few long seconds. Finally, struggling with her emotions, she said, He threatened me, Oliver. If I hadn't helped him, he would have told you. I didn't know what to do." These words, instead of eliciting sympathy, only angered him further. "You didn't know what to do?" He took a step back, almost sarcastically repeating her words. "You could have come to me, told the truth. Instead, you decided to destroy our life." His voice grew louder. Amanda sobbed, but even that didn't make him stop. "Do you understand what you've done?" He raised his hand, as if pointing to an invisible accuser. "You betrayed me. You betrayed Emily. You put this man above your family." His words echoed around the room, and for a moment, a dead silence reigned. Amanda tried to justify herself. "I didn't want it to go this far. I thought I could fix everything." Oliver turned sharply, his face twisted with rage. "Fix!" he almost shouted. "You tried to sell our house! Our house, Amanda! This is not a mistake! This is betrayal!" His words were like slaps, each blow making Amanda lower her head even deeper. Her eyes were full of tears, but she no longer tried to argue. "You destroyed everything we built," he added quietly, his voice trembling with a mixture of anger and pain. Amanda sat with her head lowered, her hair covering her face. She seemed broken, but Oliver felt no satisfaction. Instead, a void was growing inside him. Finally, Amanda spoke up. "I don't know how it happened. I felt that I had to help him. He said that I owe him, that without me, his career would be ruined." "And you believed him?" Oliver laughed skeptically. "You believed that he was worth risking everything for?" "I didn't know what to do," she cried out in response, her voice breaking. "I was afraid that you would find out, afraid that I would lose everything." "Lose?" He leaned sharply toward her. "You've already lost everything, Amanda." Those words seemed to stop her. She no longer cried. Her gaze became empty, as if she finally realized how bad everything was. The night after the confrontation with Amanda was particularly hard for Oliver. His mind, as if poisoned, replayed the smallest details of the events that had brought his family to the brink of the abyss. He knew that Jack Morgan remained a real threat, for himself, for Amanda, and, to some extent, even for their daughter Emily. But rage, resentment, and bitterness could no longer dictate his actions. Cold calculation had taken their place. It was time for justice. Oliver understood that he couldn't leave the situation unresolved. The evidence he had gathered was strong, but insufficient to hold Jack accountable for his behavior. He felt that this man must answer for everything, for the blackmail, the manipulation, the shattered dreams, and the lies that had poisoned their lives. In the morning, when Emily went to school and Amanda silently left the house, he called Frank Dillard. "Frank," Oliver said, his voice as firm as ever, "I need you to help me see this through to the end." "What do you mean?" the detective asked, though a guess was already apparent in his voice. "We need to catch him at the scene of the crime. I want him to no longer be able to threaten any of us." After a brief silence, Frank said, "I have an idea. If he's demanding money, we can use that. We'll stage a handover. I know a few cops who can help if we do everything right." "Are you sure this will work?" Oliver felt a mixture of hope and fear boiling inside him. "If we plan everything out, he'll fall into his own trap," Frank assured. The next 2 days were spent preparing. Frank contacted undercover officers, explained the situation, and presented the collected evidence. The law enforcement officials agreed to participate. They saw Jack Morgan not just as a con artist, but as a potential serial manipulator who could threaten other women as well. The key element of the operation was Amanda. Frank explained that she needed to convince Jack to meet so she could hand over the money to him. It was dangerous, and Oliver didn't agree immediately. "I'm not sure I want to involve her in this," he said at one of the meetings. Frank remained calm. "If she plays by our rules, there will be no risk. We'll always be there. But without her involvement, proving his blackmail would be much more difficult." Amanda, upon learning about the plan, initially refused categorically. She was scared and felt humiliated. But Oliver insisted. "You yourself brought us into this nightmare. Now you must help us get out of it." After long persuading and tears, she agreed. The meeting place was chosen deliberately, a small cafe with large windows in the city center. Undercover police officers occupied the neighboring tables, disguising themselves as ordinary patrons. Frank, Oliver, and 2 more operatives were in a nearby car, observing the events through a small camera hidden in Amanda's bag. Amanda arrived first. She sat at a corner table, nervously tapping her fingers on her coffee cup. Jack appeared on time, in his usual confident style. He wore an expensive suit, but his expression showed that he felt in control of the situation. "You have no idea how much you're helping me," he said as he sat down opposite her. Amanda took out an envelope containing money with preset police markers. "Here, this is all I have. After this, will you leave me alone?" Her voice trembled, but Jack didn't seem to notice. He smirked, took the envelope, and threw it into his briefcase. "Of course, darling. You did great." At that moment, the police stormed into the cafe. "Jack Morgan, you are under arrest for extortion and blackmail," one of the officers announced loudly, handcuffing him. Jack jumped up, trying to break free, but it was useless. His face twisted with shock and rage. "What the hell is this? You can't do this!" he shouted, but his words were drowned out by the general commotion. Amanda leaned back in her chair, her hands shaking, but her eyes showed relief. In the car, Oliver watched the events unfold through the camera screen. He felt a strange mix of emotions: satisfaction that Jack could no longer threaten them, and the weight of realizing that it had all become reality. When it was all over and Jack was taken to the police station, Oliver and Amanda went home. A suffocating silence prevailed between them. Emily, unaware of anything, was playing in her room. Oliver entered the living room, turned to Amanda, and finally spoke. "Is that all? Are you now ready to tell the truth?" Amanda looked down. "I know words won't change anything, but I really regret it." "Regret?" Oliver laughed, but there was no joy in his laughter. "Do you regret being caught, or that you destroyed our family?" She wanted to respond, but he raised his hand, stopping her. "We are no longer we, Amanda. I did everything to keep our family intact, but you destroyed it yourself." Amanda nodded silently, her shoulders slumping, as if she finally realized what she had lost. After Jack Morgan's arrest, the situation surrounding the Norton's family began to take a new direction. Oliver understood that despite Jack's defeat, the main battle was yet to come. His decision to file for divorce and seek full custody of Emily was not impulsive, but a measured step. The trust he once had in Amanda was shattered by her betrayal. Her actions jeopardized their daughter's well-being, and Oliver couldn't allow Emily to suffer any further. The day after Jack's arrest, Oliver met with Linda Carlisle, a well-known divorce attorney. Her office was located in downtown Chicago, in a building with high windows and a strict interior that immediately instilled confidence. Linda, a woman in a sharp suit with a piercing gaze, listened attentively to his story, reviewing the documents and evidence he had brought. "You have a strong case," she said, setting aside the printed correspondence between Amanda and Jack. "But you must understand that these proceedings are always emotional, and be prepared for it to become public knowledge. The story with Jack Morgan is already attracting media attention." Oliver looked down, taking a deep breath. "I know. But one thing is important to me. Emily must stay with me." "We can prove that," Linda replied. "You need to trust me and be ready for any questions that may arise, even the unpleasant ones." Oliver nodded, understanding that there was no turning back. The court process began several weeks later. Amanda hired her own lawyer, experienced but much softer compared to Linda. Their task was to prove that despite Amanda's mistakes, she was still capable of being a good mother. However, the evidence gathered by Oliver and his legal team suggested otherwise. The first hearing was dedicated to analyzing the collected materials. Linda Carlisle presented evidence to the court, including Amanda's financial transfers to Jack, her attempt to sell a share of the house, recordings of her meetings with her lover, and testimonies of her emotional instability. "Your Honor," Linda began her presentation, standing before the judge, "Amanda Norton has repeatedly jeopardized her daughter's future by becoming involved in destructive relationships with a person known for his criminal schemes. She has made decisions that demonstrate a clear disregard for her family's well-being." Amanda sat next to her lawyer, her head bowed. Every argument Linda made sounded like a hammer blow. Her lawyer, trying to defend his client, stated, "Yes, my client made mistakes, but these mistakes do not define her as a mother. She loves her daughter and is willing to work on herself to regain her trust." Amanda testified herself. Her voice trembled as she tried to explain her actions. "I was desperate. I thought I was protecting my family. I know I did wrong, but it was all to preserve what we had." But her words sounded weak against the evidence presented by Linda. Financial documents, recordings of conversations with Jack, and even her confession letters spoke for themselves. The court hearings lasted several weeks, turning into an emotional confrontation. Linda consulted a psychologist to provide a professional assessment of the situation. The expert indicated that, given the circumstances, Emily would be better off staying with her father, who provided stability and security. "Emily is a smart and sensitive girl," the psychologist said at the hearing, "but she is currently in a vulnerable position. Any additional upheaval could harm her emotional development." These words became another nail in Oliver's coffin. Although Amanda tried to defend herself, she realized she was losing ground. The final hearing was the culmination. The judge announced the verdict in a strict and firm voice. Oliver Norton is granted full custody of Emily Norton. Amanda Norton is granted limited visitation rights with her daughter, which must take place under supervision and in the presence of a social worker. The judge's words echoed through the courtroom. Oliver felt a heavy burden lift off his shoulders. It was not only the end of the struggle, but also the beginning of a new chapter in his life. He looked at Amanda, who was sitting across from him. Her eyes were full of tears. She silently nodded, accepting the court's decision. For Amanda, the consequences of her mistakes became a severe trial that she could not prevent. The highly publicized court case made her name synonymous with disgrace. All her colleagues, friends, even those who had recently praised her for her talent and professionalism, now avoided contact. Social media was filled with comments accusing, condemning, and sometimes openly mocking her. One colleague posted a message online that went viral. "It's unbelievable how easily talented people forget what honor means. We worked with Amanda on many projects, but now I cannot respect her as a professional. Her actions are a betrayal of both family and the principles on which our creativity is built." These words were painful, but even more painful was seeing people she considered friends like and share the post. When the court case concluded, Amanda could no longer stay in Chicago. Losing custody of Emily, she felt like a stranger in a city that was once her home. She gathered the few belongings she was allowed to take and moved to her parents' home in a small town in Iowa. Her parents welcomed her with understanding, but not without reproaches. Her mother once said, "We all make mistakes, Amanda, but you must understand that this is not just a mistake. It has destroyed lives." Consumed by the bitterness of her experiences, Amanda enrolled in therapy. For the first time in her life, she began to examine her motives and realized how her selfishness and desire to be important to Jack led to the catastrophe. Her psychotherapist, Dr. Allison, gently but firmly made Amanda confront her actions. "Why did you choose this path?" Dr. Allison asked during one of the sessions. I didn't want to feel forgotten," Amanda replied, lowering her head. "Oliver was always somewhere distant, and I wanted someone to see me, to notice me." These sessions helped Amanda realize that her actions not only destroyed her marriage, but also inflicted deep wounds on her daughter. She began writing letters to Emily, hoping to one day give them to explain her perspective and ask for forgiveness. But Amanda understood that restoring her family was impossible. The only thing she could do was to become better so that one day Emily might be able to trust her again. For Oliver, life after the court was both a relief and a new responsibility. Full custody of Emily meant that all his efforts were now focused on ensuring her safety and happiness. At first, it wasn't easy. Emily often asked questions. "Dad, why doesn't Mom live with us anymore? Doesn't she love us?" Each time, Oliver tried to explain that Mom loved her, but had made mistakes that currently prevent her from being present. He avoided speaking ill of Amanda, despite the pain she had caused him. "You know, Em, we'll manage just fine," he would say, hugging his daughter before bedtime. Oliver enrolled Emily in a new school where she quickly made friends. He set aside time for activities together, drawing, bike rides, and playing in the park. Every evening they held Questions of the Day, where Emily could ask anything, and he would answer, striving to be honest yet cautious. These rituals helped create an atmosphere of stability and confidence that Emily desperately needed after what she had gone through. A few months after the court proceedings concluded, Oliver decided to turn to something that had always helped him express his emotions: photography. He was going through old family albums when he came across a photo they had taken a few years earlier. In it, the three of them stood by their house, happy, laughing, a stark contrast to how he felt at that moment. Without much thought, Oliver took the photo, broke the frame, and began assembling its fragments, gluing them together with tape. He photographed the result, naming the piece Broken Nest. This photograph, full of pain and hope, became his way of telling his story. Unexpectedly, the work gained recognition. He entered it into a competition, and it became a finalist, then a winner, in one of the most prestigious international awards. An article in the accompanying exhibition catalog was titled "The Power of Recovery: One Father's Story." For Emily, despite all the difficulties, life began to return to normal. She thought less often about the court cases and conflicts. Oliver did everything he could to ensure her childhood was not marred by trauma. "Dad, will you always be here?" she asked one day. "Always," he replied, hugging her tightly. Her drawings began to become more cheerful, suns, flowers, smiles. She even started drawing Mom, which Oliver took as a sign that healing had begun in his daughter's heart. Oliver's life was no longer the same, but it had gained new meaning. His photograph became a symbol of hope, and his relationship with his daughter turned into a source of strength. He realized that even the deepest wounds can begin to heal if you find the courage to move forward. Now, every time he looked at Emily, he saw not only their past, but also their future, filled with light and possibilities.